Good morning. Lettuce. Let us get used to it because we got a lot of weeks of it. So we're starting a new sermon series. Sermon 1 of Until the Fall. Did you know that? We're going to start in one section, and that is Hebrews. Thankful Greg was on this week, not next week, because that's the passage we're looking at next week. But he gave you a little precursor, chapter 10, 22 through 24. That's next week's topic. We're talking about lettuce, because these are some interesting passages, and they occur throughout the Bible, but in the New Testament, and lots of different places. Our focus through this month is the ones in Hebrews. How much do you know about lettuce? Well, let's see. It belongs to what family? The lettuce family. Lettuce is a variety of sunflower. Did you know that? I didn't know that. Lettuce belongs to the sunflower family. It originates in the Mediterranean. That's where it naturally grows and has been grown from there all over the world. Lettuce prefers colder climate because that postpones the development, allows it to mature. It doesn't really like the heat. 23 million metric tons of lettuce are produced and consumed each year. The majority of globally consumed lettuce originates from the country of China. Most lettuce that's eaten around the world is grown in China. Three most common: leaf lettuce, head lettuce, cos or romaine, same name, different name for the same plant. But there are 7, what are you doing to me, Abby? There's 7 major commercially grown lettuce varieties. Leaf lettuce, loose leaf, that's the type of lettuce that we use for the majority of salads, or the one on the far side is a loose leaf lettuce. We have romaine, which is this side. It's a little slower in growing this year, but it's there. Used for salads, sandwiches. Then we have iceberg. It's the most popular grown in the U.S. It's heat sensitive. It was adapted for growth in the north rather than in the south, but it ships well. It's low in flavor, as you probably know, low in nutrients, and it is mostly water. 90% of iceberg lettuce is just water. We also have summer crisp. Botvian, anybody eat Botvian lettuce? Or French crisp? It's another type of the same type. It's kind of halfway in between a leaf lettuce and a iceberg. Then we have stem lettuce, which we don't necessarily grow or eat in North America because it's actually the stalk. It's not grown for the leaves, but the central hard woody stalk that grows in the middle of it. It's used in Asian cooking. It can be steamed, stewed, or creamed. And then we have another type of lettuce, which is oil seed. It's actually grown for just the seeds and not to be eaten. It has few leaves. It bolts quickly. That means produces a seed head. And the seeds are about 50% larger than other types of lettuce. So if you've ever had lettuce oil, you ever deep fry in lettuce oil? No. Never even knew that there was lettuce oil, but some commercial varieties are just grown for that. The leaf colors, you can have yellow, golden, reddish, bluish, variegated, different types of lettuce. Radicchio, you have a good red lettuce there. Have you seen a lettuce bolt, when it actually seeds? So you take a lettuce like this, but the seed head is a 3-foot stalk. Comes up 3 feet, produces a seed head. It has a yellow flower on it, and the flower is enough to be able, even if you only have one, it can germinate itself. The lettuce seed, I found this interesting, is 1. Lettuce produces a singular seed. and it has little feathery attachments that allow it to blow and then regrow. It's ready to harvest in 65 to 130 days after sowing. It takes quite a bit of time for lettuce to grow from seed to the point that it would bolt. But of course, we don't let it grow to full maturity because you don't want the bolt. It changes the flavor of the lettuce. It can be grown in soil or it can be grown completely in water, hydroponically. It is actually somewhat good for you. Well, quite actually. If nothing else, because of the fiber. But it also has vitamins A, B9, C, minerals, calcium, iron, copper. Darker lettuce is better for you than lighter lettuce. The fiber is in the ribs, and the minerals, and the rest of it, are in the darker part of the leaves. And then we have this one, the name iceberg. Did you ever wonder where that came from? Why is it called an iceberg lettuce? Well, it's because of how it was shipped in the beginning of the 20th century in California. This type of lettuce was shipped in rail cars, that the rail car was sealed, it had water in it, and they would float ice blocks in the top of the cars. So it would look, if you're looking at the top of the car, you would see ice on the top. It would be like an iceberg traveling down the rail. And so it was called iceberg lettuce. Traveled from California to the north underneath a floating chunk of ice. And it's maintained the name since then. How old is lettuce? You think, how long has this type of plant been around? A lot longer than I thought. Egyptians cultivated lettuce 6,000 years ago. Because it's Mediterranean, it was important to the Romans and to the Greeks, and they said that it induces sleeping. Not just because it's boring to eat, but because it just would induce sleeping. I don't know when ranch dressing was developed, but that's a whole other series. We'll just stick with the lettuce at this point. The most popular eaten lettuce is iceberg. Americans, because you can't find Canadian statistics and a variety of things, on average, each U.S. citizen has 30 pounds of lettuce every year. Most of that being iceberg lettuce. And we know that it only grows once, has to be seeded, so it's only an annual plant. What does any of that have to do with the book of Hebrews? This. You're around lettuce more than you think, aren't you? Especially at this time of year. Every time that you see lettuce from this week on, I want you to think of these passages. Does that make sense? Every time you're making a salad, every time you see it in the grocery store, think, what were we talking about last week? What was the passages that were around that? Because it's a very visual item. I'd like you to try to remember the intent of the passages. The lettuce passages are unique. The structure of them, the grammatical style that comes behind. When you say to somebody, let us, that's different than you go and do it, or let's go together. But let us is a very different style of making a request. It's an encouragement, but it's a focused encouragement. So when we read the lettuce passages, they help us to know what to focus on. You'll be reading through and it'll say, let us work on this. Let us think about this. Let us put our attention towards this. Here's where you need to concentrate. The passages come from a variety of authors, a variety of audiences, and they tie in with our thirsty concept. Through the last few summers, we've been handing out thirsty bottles, and it's an encouragement. You see somebody, you ask them if they would like a water. You know, let us share, let us remember, let us focus. They connect together to me. In today's sermon, and through this month, we're going to be looking at the passages from Hebrews. We're going to start with 4 types of passages in one in one chapter. Hebrews chapter 4 has 4 of these let us encouragements. And I wanted to do that because they tie together. It's a different style of study than what we did with 1 John. In 1 John, we were reading the entire section. We went through everything in the book. But the let us passages, I'm going to try to refrain from making all the connections in between and just pointing out that part of the passage and encouraging you to read the whole thing for context, but to spend the time to think about, why are we being encouraged with this? How does that apply? Where are we going with this part? Because we're doing Hebrews, here's the context, some parts that we need to understand, I think, to make all of the passages fit together. Hebrews is written by an unnamed author, but he's encouraging the readers to not to step back into Judaism. To say, you know Jesus, you need to remain faithful to Jesus, because Jesus is superior to the old law. The coming of the Messiah changes things. And so the connection that we have with Jesus is so important, you can't just let that go and avoid persecution to step back. If you know Jesus, you worship Jesus. It's a focus on faith. He's calling them to focus on their faith during times of difficulty, while warning them to not fall away as their ancestors did. The big image that comes up a number of times in Hebrews is they approached the promised land. You know, there they were, they got out of Egypt, they crossed through, they wandered, they get to the border of the promised land, and they're told by God, you can take this. 10 were, and 2 were. 10 bad spies say we can't do this. 2 good ones say the only way we can do this is with God. And so majority vote rules. And even though they spent 40 days in the promised land, they believed those that said they couldn't do it. And now they spend 40 years of wandering. So he uses that as an example. You come to this point of a crisis of faith where you have to decide, do I believe God or do I not? Do I believe him and therefore am going to be faithful even if it doesn't make sense? Do I trust him? Or am I going to step backwards and trust myself? And so Hebrews brings that Exodus story up several times. It does it both from Exodus and the book of Numbers because there's different reasons to quote from both sides of it. The first passage we're going to take a look at in Hebrews chapter 4, if you're following along in the guest Bibles, 1865, page 1865. The very first one, this is where we start. We're going to read the first two verses. Therefore, since the promise of entering his rest still stands, let us be careful that none of you be found to have fallen short of it. For we have all had the gospel preached to us, just as they did, but the message they heard was of no value to them because those who heard it did not combine it with faith. As I said, the previous section about this has been their opportunity to enter the promised land. The people of the Exodus. And he says they did not enter the promised land because they had a moment where they could combine it with faith and they chose to be unfaithful. God was giving them rest. They had been slaves. They were going to get the promised land, a physical environment for them to live in. Hebrews talks about the shadow and the reality. That was one thing. They couldn't even take over physical land. We're going to get a rest that's way beyond that. That's of a spiritual development. Now he's speaking about the greater fulfillment of that promise. There's a rest that still stands. Amen? There's a chance for us to enter into a perfect and final rest. They didn't do it even on the physical side, but that perfect rest is still available today. So why didn't they do it? It says the gospel was preached to them. The good news that they could enter the rest, it was preached to them, but they did not combine it with what? Faith. And not intellectual assent. faithfulness. They didn't step over the fence into the promised land. They probably believed God could do it, but they didn't take a step of faith. We need to be careful to not fall short of entering that rest. That's a pretty valid warning even today. To not just quit, to continue to pursue God and believe in His Word and trust Him, and to take those steps of faith as they're presented to us. Therefore, since the promise of entering His rest still stand, let us be careful that none of you be found to have fallen short of it. There's a none of you part of that too, which reminds us that we are looking out for one another. Don't let anyone fall short. Encourage everyone to make it all the way. The next section comes a little farther in Hebrews chapter 4. We're going to read verses 7 through 11. We pick up because he summarizes the statement with a therefore. Therefore, God again set a certain day, calling it today with a capital T. When a long time later he spoke through David, as was said before, today if you hear His voice, do not harden your hearts. For if Joshua had given them rest, God would have not spoken later about another day. There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from his own work, just as God did from His. Let us, therefore, make every effort to enter that rest, so that none of you will fall by following their example of disobedience. We can have access to the type of rest that God had on the seventh day, His Sabbath. After 6 days of creation, what did He do on the seventh day? He slowed down a little bit. Or did He rest? He rested. He rested even from His own work. The Hebrew author says, you know what? That type of rest is still available. We can be at rest from our work just as God rested from His own work. God's plan of rest is not tied to the physical promised land, but to an eternal heavenly one with God. We can have access to that rest because of Jesus. But what He calls us to is we must remain spiritually focused. Do you see that? Let us make some effort to enter that rest. Every once in a while when you think about it. What's the call? Let us make every effort to enter that rest. Don't get distracted. Don't get swayed away to other things. The most important thing in your life is your relationship with God. And to be with Him for eternity. That's not only important to you as an individual, it's important to us as a congregation. It's important to our community. What we offer, part of that good news, is that that rest is still open. There's a chance to be a part of it. Therefore, make every effort to enter that rest yourself and to invite others into it. We must remain spiritually focused and connected to Jesus. That requires effort and obedience, but not to gain salvation, but out of appreciation for it. It's when we don't appreciate salvation, we start to think there's nothing that God wants. Well, God does want you to remain faithful. Not because He needs you to be faithful, but you need to be faithful to continue appreciating what He has already done. Let us make effort to enter that rest. Yesterday we were out at Kettle Valley. If you decided at the 5-kilometer mark you weren't going to go any farther, I'm done. I just want to rest. You might still be there until you make another decision. Right? How long does that rest last before you make effort again? Before you say, you know what, the walk is good. I'm okay with this. You continue to make the effort in order to get to a new location. This is the second of 4 let us passages. Let us continue. Let us make effort. The third one combines the next two, verses 14 and 16. What's nice about reading Hebrews, if you go through and you just circle the therefores, you're going to get a lot of summary statements all the way through. It's just the way that the style of writing, because he wants to continue to make the same point and make sure that you're focusing on what he has already said. So it starts again with another therefore. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has gone through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way just as we are, yet was without sin. Let us then approach the throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. In verse 14, where it says Jesus as the great high priest, and also where it says Jesus the Son of God, this is the only passage where those two phrases are used. We read passages of Jesus being referred to as the Son of God, but to say Jesus the Son of God, it's the only time. And we read of Jesus being high priest, but the great high priest, it's the only time that it's in here too. Faith is something to be, what does he say? Let us hold firmly. Here's a bit of an illustration to that. Imagine cashing any check, all your monthly checks. If that's not enough, consider 6 months worth. Having all the cash you're going to have even for the whole year, and having that all in your purse or in your wallet. Are you going to hold firmly to that? Because if you lose it, nobody is going to replace it. Is that something you would hold firmly to? Or would you just, oh, where did that go? Would you pay attention to where you brought it and that you took it with you wherever you went next? Hold firmly has the same idea. Pay attention to it. See where it is around you at all times. Know it deeply. How much more tightly should we hold on to our faith? We would hold on to our cash. How much more tightly do we hold on to our faith? It does say another word. Let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. It's not just our faith. I have my own belief, but it's a faith that we profess. We communicate. We share with others. Verse 15 focuses on Jesus' victory over temptation, and it alludes to the idea that although he's always faithful, we're not. We fail. Verse 16 calls us forward in confidence to the throne of grace. Let us approach the throne of grace in confidence so that we can receive mercy. Mercy is the realization we should get punishment. But God chooses to not punish us. And we learn the lesson that way. We should expect punishment and condemnation, but because of Jesus, we have grace and mercy. He says, why did he give those to you? Because they help you in our times of need. When we're struggling with holding firmly to our faith and or professing it, we remember that we can approach the throne of grace with confidence. And that encourages us to continue forward, to get back on track. These let us passages, they're valuable. They're valuable to me because They're interesting, and they're a valuable reminder of what our actions should lead us towards. They call us to do something, not just think something. They're called to some specific actions, but specific in a general way. It doesn't say it has to look this way to everybody, but we all have to hold firmly to our faith, do we not? How do you do that? Well, that's for you to work through. But God expects you to hold firmly to your faith. In Hebrews 4, we have been reminded to be careful to not fall short, to be obedient while making the effort to enter God's rest, to hold firmly to the faith and profess it, and to approach the throne of grace with confidence because of Jesus. How are you going to eat your lettuce this week? Well, enjoy lettuce. It's a great time for summer salads. Enjoy lettuce and have some every day. John reminded us at the end of 1 John 5:21, he says to guard your faith, right? Hold firmly. It's the same idea that's here. Evaluate how precious your faith is. Water it and tend it so that we can enjoy its growth. Faith is not static. It's something that can constantly be improved upon. Not so that God owes us, but because we appreciate what He has done for us. Consider what gets in the way of our spiritual focus that could lead you to falling short, giving up, or being disobedient. What encourages us, what encourages you to take a step back, to not be as faithful as what you know that you can be? Couldn't quite skip over this little section, could we? Hebrews 4:12 and 13. Be a person of the Word of God. It is living and active, and we must give an account to God who sees all and knows all, which is why we need Jesus. God is looking out for us to be faithful. Sometimes we think it's the other way. He's looking for the times when we're unfaithful, but He's looking, if we're going to ask for help, to be faithful. That's why He's watching us. Consider your investment and the effort that you're putting into growing your faith and the faith of those who look up to you as an example. Faith is contagious, isn't it? And it's better grown in groups. When you're around faithful people, it's easier to be faithful. Hold firmly to your faith and what you believe and why, as well as being aware of how Satan might try to distract you, why he might try to snatch it away. Hold it tightly. Live a life of praise. See where this one ended? We can approach the throne of grace with confidence. So we live a life of praise to Jesus, the Son of God, knowing that we can have confidence before God because of Jesus, our perfect, great high priest and willing sacrifice. Challenge yourself to grow and find ways to show your thanks as we also say our thanks. Let us make application. As we read and reread and take a look at this chapter and see what did we cover and what did we not, it might become beneficial for you for the next week. The next section we're going to take a look at, this was called Let Us Enter In. You see how that fit within there? The next call in Hebrews 6:1 and 10:22 through 25 is let us mature.